Are you a risk investment or fiduciary manager and currently facing the implications of SFDR? Then you might probably know that biodiversity topics are a growing part of SFDR. I get it, your life is not easy now, but rest assured, today we will kick off with unraveling what ties these two even more together and help you out with some do's, don'ts, and booby traps. My name is Cherien van Ampt. I'm Varrlyn's lead of the value stream Dealingroom Sustainability Services. Today, joining me at my table is an SFDR expert and a consultant specialized in natural capital investments. Boris, can I start with you as my SFDR expert? Can you tell me a bit about yourself and mainly what type of issues you solve?
Yes, with pleasure. I'm currently helping inter alia Dutch and French companies comply with SFDR and ESG-related regulations through my position in the law firm Experio, where I'm in charge of ESG and regulatory topics at the European level. Actually, I've been working for 15 years on these topics for organizations that can be divided into two categories. For organizations such as the United Nations and the Council of the European Union in order to develop ESG guidelines for the financial industry. I also worked for a data vendor to develop ESG analysis and methodologies before to help asset managers comply with ESG-related regulations such as SFDR and the EU Taxonomy during these last few years.
Yes, and I'm so glad, Boris, that I can proudly say that you're my colleague nowadays. And we're catering to a joint client. So I'm very proud that you also want to take me on this journey today. Jos, you're quite senior within the asset management area. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your expertise.
All right, sure, I can. So I've been an institutional investment manager for most of my career. Managing various asset classes ranging from currencies to fixed income, commodities, and other derivatives. And the last 12 years, I've been investing in what I like to call natural capital. But currently, I work as an independent natural capital investment consultant where I help financial institutions, buy side as well as sell side, who want to set up a mandate investing in agriculture, for instance, in forestry or in carbon offsets, or institutions that are struggling with biodiversity risk management. I help them setting up their strategy, for instance. I help them setting up their processes, implement procedures, due diligence, governance, and the like. So that's what I do.
That's quite a 180 degrees you have there of skills. Well, maybe we can first talk about SFDR, because I'm so curious where we're actually at and where are we going with this?
Yes, actually, SFDR is currently deploying its requirements regarding product classification and communications that start to be more and more quantitative in order to pursue the objective of improving data comparability and transparency in the market for sustainable investment products. During last year, most European financial institutions have finished to prepare their disclosure under level 2 of SFDR, including the first part of the EU taxonomy's requirements with objective 1 and 2 regarding climate change. We are now at a point where financial institutions are preparing the next set of requirements. Among them, there are the principal adverse impact indicators, the famous BI indicators, yes, which will go from a narrative level to a more quantitative one by the middle of this year. The disclosures about the EU taxonomy will also require to financial institutions integrating objectives 3 to 6 concerning topics such as circular economy, as well as biodiversity. Yeah. That is a complex topic.
Yeah. Biodiversity, yes, I'm quite intrigued. And as you say, that's quite a difficult topic. Jos, can you shed some light on that biodiversity? What is it?
Okay. I might start with what it's actually not, or at least not primarily. In my view, it is not primarily about fluffy animals, about endangered species. important. Conservation is important. But I think in a corporate setting, it is about ecosystems and whether these ecosystems are intact or not, and if they can still provide their ecosystem services to humanity in general, but also to companies, right? These ecosystem services are important to us, like soil ecosystem services. Without a healthy soil ecosystem with bacteria, fungi, and other critters, we will not be able to produce enough food. Or forests. Healthy forests sequester carbon, regulate watersheds, provide hydrology services, etc., etc. And we desperately need these services. Again, companies need them, right? A lot of these services are not provided in the at the level of the corporate headquarters, of course, but they are provided in the value chain of corporation. And therefore, it is also important to see these assets, these ecosystems, as important assets at the corporate level, and not just see them as free externalities, which you can do with what you want, right? Because if these ecosystem services are no longer intact, it becomes very difficult to provide your services or produce your goods as a corporation. Very simple example, again, the food sector. You can't produce food, healthy food, in enough quantity, then you really got a problem.
This is really interesting. Are there also some drivers in the market, like frameworks or theoretical guidance for this?
Yes, definitely. And Boris already spoke about, of course, but we have also newer legislation in Europe, for instance. For instance, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the CSDDD, which requires companies to be transparent about their value chain and also take responsibility on what happens in that value chain, right? So that increases responsibility of the end user. This is still in the sort of concept phase, and this legislation might be watered down or whatever. There's always a compromise. But luckily, there are also industry initiatives where the financial industry is taking responsibility itself, right? For instance, we all know the TNFD, of course, but there is also the Nature 100 initiatives and many more.
And is there a thing that also glues all these type of initiatives together, or is there maybe something that they are hungry for? That's a common denominator.
I would say that the emphasis and the focus on the value chain is what is important everywhere, as well as in the legislation and the industry initiatives, right? The value chain is important. But the problem with that, or the challenge, is the data. The investee companies themselves do not even have the data, let alone the financial institutions, right? It is a problem which needs solving.
Yeah, data. I think this is maybe an Ivy League word, maybe. Boris, can you tell us a bit what the position actually is from data, from an SFDR point of view?
Yes, Cherien. From my experience, I could see that financial institutions face issues with data, and this partly come from the lack of consistency of SFDR. This is actually the first challenge I see that is due to the sustainability field, because SFDR aims at standardizing data through methodologies which are not yet themselves subject to consensual approaches at the European level and even at the international one, leading to a lack of consistency and data availability in the market. This is actually the second challenge I see, because SFDR covers data that is not yet fully provided by the market. even from large ESG data vendors. Here I'm talking about the data reviewed by vendors, for instance, from the Taxonomy technical screening criteria.
Yeah.
And for unlisted equities, this data is very limited on the market. So calculating the full taxonomy alignment weight of portfolios composed by unlisted issuers is almost impossible with current data from the market. However, calculations are theoretically possible with relevant skilled people. And this observation leads me to the third SFDR linked challenge I see, that is the need for people with complete ESG skills, gained both in ESG data vendors, asset managers, and UN institutions, having developed several ESG guidelines used in SFDR and often inspiring the European Union.
These are quite some challenges. Can I see them separately? I'm hoping. Or are they even intertwined to get together again? How do they position themselves towards one another?
This is a very good question, Cherien. Thanks for asking it. Actually, these challenges are connected, and this connection can be seen with the gap between SFDR's requirements and the reality of the market through limited data about unlisted issuers from data vendors, and the lack of relevant skills to understand ESG data and sustainability-related regulations. This situation leads financial markets participants to face difficulties to comply with SFDR at two levels. The data to do required calculations and the in-house skills to link relevant methodologies behind ESG data with the regulator's expectation and its reasoning. A good example of this difficulty is visible in SFDR's Article 2, Paragraph 17, that provides, in substance, that a sustainable investment has to include investee companies following good governance practices. As these practices are not subject to consensus at the European level, how do you want to deal with this data without deeply knowing ESG methodologies and cultural approaches of national laws, or the EU's reasoning about the good governance concepts? This is a real question.
Yeah, this is a real question, you say, and I think that remains a question. But to summarize, so actually 3 hurdles you see now in the market. I've heard you talking about the data and also data vendors and the role they play. And secondly, inconsistencies between the regulator and the market itself.
Right.
And last but not least, also it's people working here, but also the skills that has to be more reversible.
Yes.
So Jos, actually I hear you emphasize on the value chain, maybe not once, twice more, I think. So this is pivotal. If I look in terms of the investment process, what position should the value chain take in that respect?
When you look at risk management and sustainability management, stewardship, etc., it should have probably a central role. Let's divide investments up into listed investments, so the public equity, for instance, versus private equity. In private equity type of investments, real assets, you probably know a lot as an investor, right? You probably know a lot about the localization, about for instance, talking about biodiversity, about the pressures in that specific localization. There are all kind of methodologies like Encore, IBAT database that you can use to get granular data, right? So that should be relatively easy if you have the expertise in-house. And like Boris said, there is quite a bit of a challenge with respect to the combination of expertise that you need to make this all happen, right? You need to know about data, you need to know about sustainability, about investing, all these things. So that's maybe a bit difficult, but you've got a good position as an investor if you look at private equity type of investments, right? Usually, I'm generalizing a bit. But looking at public equity, you do not know the localization. You might know where the headquarters of the corporation is, but you do not know its whole value chain. For a company in the food and agriculture sector, for instance, they usually do not quite know their full value chain either. So it would be peculiar if a data vendor would know that, if the company itself doesn't know it. So I think that is lacking. I think that in these data, the whole value chain thing, the whole biodiversity issue, ecosystem issue, all these things are not in there. And again, there are methodologies to do that, but they're complicated and you need skills.
This is quite a lot, Jos. In terms of forward thinking, we don't have so much time. The whole globe is at risk. Can you share with us some solutions that can actually save us in this point of time?
A very important thing is transparency on the value chain, and nobody is better suited to provide that transparency than the corporations themselves who are working in that value chain or with that value chain. But before we are there, which will take maybe a while, there are obviously types of modeling and methodologies to look into biodiversity risk, right? For biodiversity impact. If you know the localization in private markets, for instance, then there's eDNA sampling, right? These days, you just take a sip of water or a handful of or a pinch of soil, and you already know what the biodiversity is at that localization. You just can see it. And otherwise, there are remote sensing methodologies, perhaps also with boots on the ground, that can tell you a lot about the vegetation, about the progress or the decline of that vegetation. There's a lot of stuff happening, but it costs. Also for public equity, there are rough estimates via modeling. For instance, the biodiversity footprint for financial institutions is but one example that does this. You can model these things and you can start engaging with the listed equities. I think that you need to do a little bit more yourself than only depend on rating agencies. But yeah, in the end, the solution is the corporations themselves have to provide transparency.
Is there also any good news?
Well, that was the good news. I think the good news now you yourself can do some things, right? And while waiting for the rest to catch up.
Boris, this is some of the solutions that Jos can provide us with, and also some good news from your end, from SFDR. Are there some quick fixes you can share, or are we doomed?
Yes, I can share some. But if I have to pick two, I will talk about shareholder engagement and transparency, as well as biodiversity. On the one hand, I see that shareholder engagement activities promoted by SFDR open the door to a form of regulation from private actors to other ones that lets imagine synergistic ways to supplement ESG regulatory trends and to create standards from the market to invite companies to be more transparent. And on the other hand, I see the biodiversity topic that grows at both the international and European levels. And these trends can be checked with the United Nations COP15 on biodiversity and the EU Taxonomy's next objectives.
So this is indeed good news. So seeing SFDR as a gateway and paving the way also for all of these other initiatives to further grow now. Last but not least, I'm dying to ask actually this question to the both of you. What should we start doing? But also tell me, what is the biggest booby trap that we are going to fall if we don't have a careful eye? Boris, can you tell me please what you should stop doing?
Yes, sure. I think we should stop thinking that only financial, legal data or project management skills are enough to deal with SFDR and ESG related regulations. I think we should start creating common values around ESG issues and in the organization, promoting awareness training sessions, mixing teams with more people with skills gained in both international institutions and ESG data vendors. Trap is to consider SFDR as an ordinary regulation and try to deal with it through limited views with stakeholders from similar industries. Indeed, SFDR is based on non-consensual ESG methodologies and international regulations reasoning, as well as multicultural concepts behind data represented by arguable elements under ESG concepts. This is actually what we can see with the previous example of good governance practices, where unarguable elements like the remuneration perception of bonuses can be different between the Anglo-Saxon world and the Latin culture. This kinds of concept directly impact on the relevance by which a company can meet SFDR's expectation and avoiding to be exposed to regulatory risk. To sum up, the BRAP is to try to comply with SFDR by being focused only on the strategical solutions through data implementation, portfolio construction, or project management to lead changes, because the top priority with SFDR should be looked through the regulatory lens with a tactical solution that can be brought by understanding ESG methodologies behind data and the regulatory reasoning behind the requirements. And that raises the need for collaborators with experiences both in ESG data vendors and United Nations institutions, because their methodological approaches are often the basis of ESG expectation from the European Union.
Well, some booby traps over there, Boris. Jos, if I look at you, what would you say? Well, Cherien, risk managers, investor managers, fiduciary management, please, as of today, stop doing this.
You all should stop hiding behind the narrative that the data are not there, right? The data are there. We only have to discover them, right? And I already mentioned a couple of ways of doing that.
And if they stop doing this, then they have to replace all of this work for something else. So what do they start doing then?
Well, focus on the value chain, right? Because just as we have in climate change, we have scope 1, 2, 3. You have that in biodiversity and all other sustainability targets also. And in biodiversity, it is really, really important to get this upstream scope right.
And is there a booby trap that maybe you yourself fell in and that you now want to warn us about?
That's a very personal question. I would say that financial institutions need to be brave enough to have and publish a biodiversity strategy, right? And using a biodiversity definition that goes beyond conservation of rainforests or fluffy animals, right? It should look at risk and impact, so the famous double materiality thing, and perhaps also include nature positive investments, right? The story there is that there is just not a big enough universe, but come on, there are always new and exciting ideas, and the market is growing. So perhaps financial institutions should again stop hiding and take some initiative there.
Well, to take a recap, I promise that rest assured there's some help on its way. Can I say that please look at also how you, with what type of people you surround yourself and your team with, type of skills that are on the table. But also be very mindful of the data that you have and the level of data, and whether it's more granular data, but also the locality of data is, I think, pivotal, as Jos pointed it out to us. So that's in the data and data vendors scope, and don't overestimate the need of data you actually need. Is that safe to say, Jos?
I think there are some challenges with data. Even so, for instance, you need a bit of granularity on the localization, right? It's not enough to say, my investment is in this country, and therefore I've got this biodiversity risk, right? You need to know which ecosystem, for instance. And again, I would say, in the end, that's the task of the corporations in which financial institutions invest in, to provide that transparency. But that's a challenge, that granularity. And there is a lot of data available. We just need skills to make sense of it.
This was a complex subject to talk about. So if you need any help or would like to further dialogue with us, reach out to us via our website, varrlyn.com. And last but not least, I want to thank Boris and Jos for being here today and explaining it really well to us.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. You're welcome.